When Mrs. Frederick C. Little's second son arrived, everybody noticed that he was not much bigger than a mouse. The truth of the matter was, the baby looked very much like a mouse in every way. He was only about 2 inches high, and he had a mouse's sharp nose, a mouse's tail, a mouse's whiskers, and the pleasant, shy manner of a mouse. Before he was many days old, he was not only looking like a mouse, but acting like one too, wearing a gray hat and carrying a small cane. Mr. and Mrs. Little named him Stuart, and Mr. Little made him a tiny bed out of 4 clothespins and a cigarette box. Stuart Little was my first favorite chapter book. It meant so much to me as a child. So in 1999, when I was 10, I was so excited to go see the movie. I couldn't wait to see that sassy little mouse and his adventures brought to life on the big screen. This was pre-Harry Potter movie, so I feel like my adaptation expectations had not yet been set too impossibly high.
You're invited to meet the newest member of the Little family.
Attention, everybody.
This is Stuart. Hello, everyone.
Look how they mess with my boy.
I cried on the way home from the theater that night. It felt like a knife in my little heart. I took it as a personal insult. As you can see, this book is well loved. I've read it and dropped it in the bathtub, spilled soup and God knows what else all over it. It was my go-to book for eating dinner if I had nothing else going on. This thing is hanging on by a thread, but it was one of the few treasures that I managed to salvage from my childhood home. I've had this particular copy since grade 3, when I got it for 25 cents from the little cart at the front of the library where they sell the discarded books. What a find. I first heard this story when one of my favorite teachers, Mrs. Moffat, read it to us in class. It was a life-changing experience. She read us a chapter a day if we behaved, and she turned off the lights and let us close our eyes if we wanted. It was the best part of the day. After the part in the story where Stuart gets stuck in the window shades, I begged her to let me borrow the book that night to read ahead. She agreed as long as I promised to keep what happened to myself. I agreed, but in retrospect, it was too much to ask that I could handle that kind of power. And I guarantee that I told at least 2 people what happened to that brave little mouse. Though I don't think that many of my peers were as invested in the story as I was. I love Garth Williams' pen and ink illustrations. They're so loose and full of personality. These images, along with White's clever words, were part of why I felt so comfortable escaping into Stuart's world. I realized as I cracked open the spine of this book after so many years that there was a time when I lived within these pages. I was so desperate to shrink down to mouse size and run off into the thicket and never look back. It's the same reason why I think I was so obsessed with Thumbelina and Wind in the Willows. Really, if there's small things and a rodent in a smart little waistcoat, I'm all in, baby. So let's talk a little bit about the movie. I don't want to spend too much time on negativity. I feel like this movie has been sufficiently picked apart online. And besides, I feel like I've already been vindicated by the critics of the time. At this point in my life, I can understand that the studio wanted to make as much money as possible by appealing to as many people as possible with some fast food toy tie-ins. There's no conspiracy here, just standard Hollywood stuff. And if you like this movie, good for you. I hope that there are people out there that get comfort from revisiting something familiar from their childhoods. But for me, the book that it was based on was my comfort read. The movie is just marginally related to it. The stories that make up the chapters of this book are reduced to set pieces. Stuart is dragged along from one thing happening to him to another. Book Stuart learns and grows, metaphorically. He falls in love and embarrasses himself in front of girls and leaves home to find himself. The book characters are also so warm and real, and as someone who is an American, E.B. White's prose makes me feel like they exist somewhere in a Norman Rockwell painting. They're so timeless, but it's not so in the movie. A huge problem that I have with the movie is the character George, Stuart's older brother. In the movie, he's played by Jonathan Lipnicki, the poor man's Jake Lloyd. I don't know if this will make sense, but Jonathan Lipnicki is to Dennis Quaid as Jake Lloyd is to Kevin Costner, in that I can barely tell the 2 actors apart, but I much prefer the latter. I used the Dennis Quaid, Kevin Costner analogy, from everything from actors to cheese, and it serves me well. Anyway, George is a teenager in the book and very ADHD coded. He is hyperactive, well-meaning, and lovably annoying, like most teenagers, and thinks he has all the answers. He confidently offers up his opinions when not asked, and you just know that if this was current day rather than 1945, he would be terminally online, probably a Reddit moderator. My favorite Book George moment is when Stuart goes missing. He gets distracted by finding an old rowing machine and forgets to look for his baby brother. Very relatable. In the movie, probably because the studios wanted to market to younger audiences, he's basically a toddler with a very gee-whiz personality. This adaptation may be live action, but all the characters are flat and cartoonish, and it's not like they didn't have top-notch actors to work with either. They had Hugh Laurie. Complaining about Movie George brings me to my biggest specific gripe, the fact that in the film, Stuart is adopted. Now in the book, Stuart is the Littles' biological son. It's presented as very matter-of-fact, and though his parents voice their concerns at his condition in private, it is more in relation to his safety than that boy ain't right. Stuart is very different from all his other family members from birth, and that's the key to the point of the entire story, at least for me. It's a coming-of-age tale and a quest for identity. Now, as a literature trope, you expect an adopted character to feel like he doesn't quite belong, to embark on a quest to find his origins, but to examine the character that was just born different into their family. To be a perpetual outsider, living among your own kin, is a complex sort of isolation that is really missing in favor of what is essentially the plot of Annie. Kids understand nuance and feel things much deeper than popular media sometimes gives them credit for, in lieu of bright flashing colors and mass marketability. If there's one emotion that youngsters struggle with, it's isolation, especially the abstract kind that is kind of hard to communicate. Don't you ever feel like you were born as a mouse into a family of humans? Especially if day-to-day life seems so much easier to the people around us as we struggle not to get squished on our way to the bus stop. The focus on the movie is Stuart looking for his family, but the book is Stuart looking for his place in the world. The focus on the movie is Stuart looking for his family, but the book is Stuart looking for his place in the world. He leaves home to look for the bird he loves, but as his family acknowledges and fears, animals by their very nature are wild, and children eventually leave home, and that there was always just something inherently different about Stuart. Interestingly, the Stuart Little movie was written by none other than M. Night Shyamalan. Isn't that strange? What a huge missed opportunity for a crazy twist. Maybe the movie could have been filmed from Stuart's point of view, and we get the Sixth Sense reveal that he was a mouse the whole time. I think, though, if we're doing a dark Stuart Little adaptation, the twist should be that Stuart was the product of an experimental drug given to his mother during her pregnancy, rather than some unholy rodent union, and the Littles live such a fancy Manhattan lifestyle because of a big payout from the pharmaceutical company to keep them quiet. When Stuart finds out, he's disgusted. Maybe he just runs away, or maybe he takes his parents to court and it becomes a tense legal drama. Either way, Stuart breaks the cycle of generational trauma. I like a lot of Shyamalan's work. I even have a soft spot for Lady in the Water, but I really wish he would have gotten weird with this movie. As a know-it-all kid, I used to get really picky about book-to-movie adaptations. There was a time that I couldn't get over the fact that Professor Snape didn't have a goatee, but I'm not such a purist anymore. I would actually prefer an adaptation to be vastly different from the book if it serves the director's vision. In fact, some great movies can come from taking liberties with the source material. For example, The Muppet Christmas Carol, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, Howl's Moving Castle, Treasure Planet. Just to show that there are no residual hard feelings, there are a couple things that I liked about the movie. I'm a fan of Nathan Lane as Snowbell, even if it's creepy watching his mouth move. The positive reviews cite the realistic-looking CGI, but I think it looks pretty generic and of its time. It also kind of takes away the whimsy and magic of the story by making the animals look too realistic. It makes me think that any good adaptation would need to be all animated or maybe stop motion. Once again, it's just really hard to reconcile the way that the movie looked. It's very Flubber or Mike Myers' Cat in the Hat, when the original book illustrations are just so beautiful. Also, I think that Michael J. Fox as Stuart Little was a great choice. He gives a very sweet and earnest performance. Although book Stuart was a bit sassier, and I feel like Mr. J. Fox really could have delivered that. Like I said, I don't want to focus on negativity. I only feel so strongly about the adaptation missing the mark because the book was so beautifully written. I'm not as bitter about it now, mostly because when I was poking around on Rotten Tomatoes, I felt vindicated reading some of the reviews. It has a 41% audience score, which is really the only score I look at anymore. But mostly I felt vindicated when I read Roger Ebert's review from the movie's original 1999 release. He says, "I once read the book by E.B. White on which this story is founded. The peculiar thing about this book is that Stuart, in the imagination of the reader, swells until he occupies as much psychic space as any of the other characters. He is a mouse, but his dialogue runs from margin to margin just like the words of the humans, and his needs and fears are as great. Our intelligence tells us that Stuart is a mouse, but our imagination makes him into a full-sized literary character. In the book, Stuart works just fine as a character, but movies are an unforgivably literal medium, and the fact is, no live-action movie about Stuart Little can possibly work because he is just so much smaller than everyone else." And then in my favorite part of the review, Ebert goes on to say, "Its hero upstages anything the plot can possibly come up with. A 2-inch talking humanoid mouse upstages roadsters, cats, little brothers, everything. I tried imagining a movie that would deal seriously and curiously with an intelligent and polite child who looked like a mouse. Such a movie would have to be co-directed by Tim Burton and David Lynch. I am reminded of the old man who finds a frog in the road. 'Kiss me,' says the frog, 'and I will turn into a beautiful princess.' The man puts the frog in his pocket. 'Didn't you hear my offer?' asks the frog. 'I heard it,' the old man says, 'but frankly at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog.' My guess is that the makers of Stuart Little might not understand the point of this story." Ebert's suggestion of Lynch and Burton as co-directors for his imaginary adaptation would be amazing, but it got me thinking about what my adaptation would look like. Aesthetically speaking, I feel like the setting of this movie in New York in 1945 should be warm, candy Technicolor. My director of choice here would either have to be Wes Anderson or Guillermo del Toro, and it would be a combination of live action and stop motion or puppets, so that Stuart is a tangible little creature that the actors can pick up and interact with. My dream casting, at least of the Little family, is as follows: Christoph Waltz as Mr. Little, Tilda Swinton as Mrs. Little, Jason Isaacs as Snowbell, and Rhys Darby as Stuart. There needs to be great attention paid to the set design. I want it sumptuous and detailed. Speaking of sumptuous, let's talk wardrobe. Stuart Little is all about his outfits. It's the first step in any of his little adventures. He is a very dapper gentleman. He would never wear jeans, unless it was sort of some kind of coordinated look. This mouse's first outfit canonically included a pocket handkerchief, so I feel like there needs to be significant detail paid to his wardrobe. As for the soundtrack, no generic score, no pop music. The 1999 movie featured Lou Bega of Mambo No. 5 fame, and that is really not the vibes. Flutes and scurrying music are a must. I feel like I'd want Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead as my composer. He'd get it, that whole whimsical mouse vibe, since Tom York is actually a mouse that got a wish granted to become human. I need something weird and experimental, but still something chill enough that you'd want to play when you're relaxing or working. The unfortunate reality of Stuart Little, or really any adaptation of a well-loved book, is that there is no one-to-one substitute of finding refuge in the pages of that book, even if the movie is technically perfect. As a kid, I read as an escape, or to pass the hours between my screen time restrictions. The passage of time often felt excruciating. There was nothing worse than being bored. I think that's why I was so impatient to become an adult, because I figured that being a grown-up meant doing whatever you liked with your time. What a fool I was. Maybe I'm just less nostalgic towards the actual beloved piece of childhood media itself than I am longing for a time when I sat atop my seemingly endless hoard of time like a baby dragon, unappreciative of its immense value and physically unable to spend it. Children, like baby dragons, have a great capacity for destruction, but really so does a mouse. And a little mouse may be more of an accurate or relatable metaphor for a child. The bustling adult world does not seem as though it was built to accommodate and support such small and vulnerable creatures. But in his own stylish way, Stuart tests creative solutions to these obstacles. He is an active character in the book, despite the lack of control he has over the treacherous environment that he's growing up in. But he also gets frustrated and discouraged, sometimes even acting out. And the movie just Disneyfied a little mouse boy, rather than to tell a story that could have really resonated with children and adults alike. But that's nothing new in Hollywood. But thankfully, the existence of the movie doesn't in any way negate the existence of the original book. As an adult millennial, I feel as though I missed a step in the growing up process, and I find that in my 30s, I still have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, let alone what the heck is going on in the wide world. But as an anxious mouse person like Stuart, lately I find myself relishing the opportunity to don costumes to face the potential adventures that lie outside my door, even if I'm just braving the Walmart. It's really all in how you frame things. Stuart continued to push forward in his journey, heeding the call of his inner nature, drawn towards some great unknown adventure, despite his constant discomfort and social anxiety. This book really hits differently as an adult. I have always felt that this book, like many good books, seems to end at the beginning of something else entirely, like the story is building up to something beyond itself. If you take anything out of this video, please let it be that you either read or reread this book. Give a copy to a kid in your life. Put one in a community library box. Especially if you're struggling to get back into reading. This is one that you can read a chapter at a time, maybe before bed when you're all snug and cozy in your PJs. Maybe you could even get the audiobook so you can experience being read to again. I've really been struggling with finding my love of reading again, and I went to school for English literature. Actually, that's probably exactly why I stopped enjoying reading. That's the way I look at it, said Stuart. I rather expect that from now on, I shall be traveling north until the end of my days. Worst things that can happen to a person, said the repairman. Yes, I know, answered Stuart. Following a broken telephone line north, I have come upon some wonderful places, continued the repairman. Swamps where cedars grow, and turtles wait on logs, but not for anything in particular. Fields bordered by crooked fences, broken by years of standing still. Orchards so old that they have forgotten where the farmhouse is. In the north I have eaten my lunch in pastures rank with ferns and junipers, all under fair skies with a wind blowing. My business has taken me into spruce woods on winter nights where the snow lay deep and soft, a perfect place for a carnival of rabbits. I have sat at peace on the freight platforms of railroad junctions in the north, in the warm hours and the warm smells. I know fresh lakes in the north, undisturbed except by fish and hawk, and of course by the telephone company, which had to follow its nose. I know all these places well. They are a long way from here. Don't forget that. And a person who is looking for something doesn't travel very fast. That's perfectly true, said Stuart. Well, I guess I'd better be going. Thank you for your friendly remarks. Not at all, said the repairman. I hope you find that bird. Stuart rose from the ditch, climbed into the car, and started up the road that led towards the north. The sun was just coming up over the hills on his right. As he peered ahead into the great land that stretched before him, the way seemed long, but the sky was bright, and he somehow felt he was headed in the right direction.